Today I'm sewing and sharing a velvet dress with statement sleeves. This is Simplicity 9642. This dress has an invisible zipper in the back, ruffles all along the bottom, and special details in the sleeve that make it a standout piece. You can find this pattern at your local fabric store and online. I've left a link for you below so you can check out all the details, grab a copy, and sew along with me. I hope you join me, so grab that pattern, cut out your fabric, mark your dots and your notches, and let's get started. On the bottoms of our center front pieces, we have notches indicating where we're going to be doing our gathering. We're going to take these pieces to the sewing machine and using the longest stitch on your machine and leaving tails of thread at the beginning and at the end of your stitching, we're going to gather the front bodice pieces from notch to notch. Before I sew my front bodice pieces together along the center seam, I'm going to serge both of these raw edges at the center separately. Along the center fronts of the front bodice pieces, we also have a large and a small dot, indicating our stitching starting and stopping points. I've marked the large and small dots here with pins. Now I'm going to place these pieces right sides together and clip in place along the center front. Sew from the dot to the dot with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at both points to secure. I've transferred the darts from the back bodice pattern piece onto the wrong side of the fabric using a tracing wheel and tracing paper. Now I'm ready to pin them in place. I'm going to fold the dart in half, pin through one dart leg and out the other. Do this for both darts. Then take your darts to the sewing machine and sew from the bottom edge to the point, leaving thread tails at the point so that you can tie them in knots. Place your front and back pieces right sides together, matching your shoulder seams and your side seams, and pin in place. Sew your shoulder seams and your side seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then finish your seams. Grab your skirt front piece and both of your skirt side front pieces. Place them right sides together so that you match the sets of notches. And pin those seams. Sew those seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then finish your seams. I've transferred my darts to my skirt back pieces and now I'm ready to pin them in place just as I did for the bodice back pieces. Now that my darts are pinned, I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew from the top to the point, leaving thread tails at the point so that I can tie them in knots. Place your front and back skirt pieces right sides together and pin your side seams. Sew the side seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then finish your seams. Now place your bodice and your skirt pieces right sides together, matching your center fronts, your side seams, and your center backs, and pin in place. On either side of your center front, you're going to go ahead and pull those gathering stitches in your bodice so that the bodice fits the skirt in this section. Once it fits and the gathers are distributed evenly, go ahead and pin in place. Now we're going to sew the bodice to the skirt from center back to center back. There's a large dot that you transferred from your pattern piece to your center front, and you'll be slightly pivoting your stitching here, coming down one side of the center front, pivoting, and then continuing along the other side of the center front, just maintaining that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once it's stitched, finish your seam in your preferred method. Before I start applying my zipper to the center back seam, I'm going to finish both center back seams from top to bottom separately. The pattern calls for a 22 inch long invisible zipper. I'm going to open up my zipper. I'm going to take it to my ironing board and use my finger to unroll those coils and press them open so that they lay as flat as possible. Do this for both sides of the zipper tape. Then I'm going to place the right side of my zipper tape right sides together with my right back bodice piece. I want my top zipper stop to be 3/4 of an inch from the top edge of the garment. And I want my main zipper teeth to be 5/8 of an inch away from the center edge from top to bottom. Line that up and pin in place. Using a zipper foot or an invisible zipper foot, we're going to sew this zipper tape in place from the top to as far as your presser foot will allow you to get to the bottom of the zipper, sewing close to those zipper teeth. Now that right side of the zipper tape is installed, go ahead and close your zipper and place the left side of the zipper tape right sides together with the left side of the dress. With the zipper closed, we can now make sure to align the waist seam and the top of the dress. So aligning that waistline seam and the neckline, pin your left zipper tape at those 2 points, making sure once again that the zipper teeth will be 5/8 of an inch away from the side edge. And then we can open up that zipper and continue pinning the full length of that left side of the zipper tape, and then sew this side of the zipper tape in place just as we did on the other side. Now I've closed my zipper and I'm ready to sew the remaining bottom portion of my center back seam. Place those center back sections right sides together and pin from the bottom of your zipper stitching to the bottom of the skirt piece. I'm going to start sewing this section still using my zipper foot so I can get my needle as close to the end of my zipper stitches as possible. I'm going to sew for about 2 or 3 inches and then switch back to my regular foot, sewing this seam with a 5/8 inch seam allowance to the bottom and backstitching to secure. Apply interfacing to the wrong sides of your front and back facing pieces. Then place them right sides together, matching your notches at the shoulder seams, and pin in place. Sew your shoulder seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and press your seams open. Trim the bottom edges of your facing to 3/8 of an inch. Then we can finish the outer edges of the facing in your preferred method. I'm going to press the edges to the wrong side by 1/4 of an inch and stitch them in place. Now we're going to start applying our facing to the neckline, matching your center fronts and your shoulder seams and pin in place. For the center backs, you're going to open out that zipper seam allowance and place the center back of your facing along the serging line of the center back of your bodice. Pin in place right along those edges. And do the same for your opposite center back. And then continue pinning the entirety of that neckline. Then we can sew our facing to the neckline with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, pivoting at that center front dot that you transferred from your pattern piece so that you can get a nice clean V here. Stitch from the raw edge of the top back bodice to the raw edge on the opposite side. Once that's sewn, we're going to clip into the center front of the facing until we reach the stitching line, but not beyond. Then we're going to trim our seams and clip the curves of the neckline. Now place the center back of your facing and the center back of your dress right sides together, and pin those raw edges together alongside that zipper tape. Do that on both sides. Then using your zipper foot and a 1/2 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew down these horizontal edges for both center backs. Then trim your center back corners. And then we're going to understitch the neckline, turning that facing out and away from the dress. We're going to sew the facing to the seam allowance all the way around with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Because your presser foot won't allow you to stitch all the way to the corner of the center back, and you may even encounter difficulty around this V area. Just understitch as far as you can. Then we can turn that facing to the inside of the garment, poke out those center back corners, and then give that neckline a really good press. And then to finish off the facing, we want to secure it to the seam allowances on the inside. So turn the garment right side out, and using a needle and thread, I'm going to sew the edges of the facing to the seam allowances at the shoulder seams and at the center front waistline seam. Just lining up those seams and tacking those in place so that these stitches are invisible from the outside of the garment. And for the bottom of the center front facing, I'm just going to turn it wrong sides together. Then just edge stitch that in place for a nice clean finish on the inside. Now we're going to start forming the pleats on our sleeves. At the top of your sleeve, you have 5 sets of pleats. For each set, we're going to take the outer lines and fold them to their center line. Once you've folded that fabric to the center, we're going to pin them in place, and do this for all 5 sets. I've transferred those pleat lines to the wrong side of my sleeve fabric. Now I'm going to make small notches at the top of each pleat line so that it's easier for me to work from the right side of the fabric. Now I'm going to turn the sleeve to the right side, and I'm going to bring the outer notch fabric to the center for each set and pin in place. Once I have all my pleats pinned, I'm going to take them to my sewing machine and baste the top of each pleat set. Now we're going to work on the pleat lines at the bottom of the sleeve. For those lines, place the fabric right sides together and pin through the lines that you transferred just as you would for a dart, pinning through the line on one side so that it comes out the other line on the other side. Now that that's pinned, we're going to use the lines that we transferred as our stitching guide, stitching from the bottom to the top of the line, back stitching to secure. Now take this excess material on the inside of that pleat and center it around that stitching line. Then we're going to stitch from the right side of the fabric, based along the bottom of that pleat. And now we can form the center pleat. Fold your fabric once again right sides together and pin through one of your center pleat lines and out the other. Once again, take it to your sewing machine and use those lines as your stitching guide to secure that pleat. And then we're going to press this excess pleat material on the inside of the garment, equally on top of either side of that stitching line. And from the front of the garment, we're going to stitch in the ditch of the stitching that we just created to secure that pleat. Now grab your sleeve head piece, fold it wrong sides together, and pin in place along the long outer curve. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and baste as pinned from one side to the other, using the longest stitch on your machine and remembering to leave thread tails on both sides so that you have threads to pull for gathering. Now we're going to place that gathered edge of the sleeve head on the wrong side of the top of the sleeve, matching the corner of the sleeve head with the dot that you transferred from your pattern piece, and pin in place. Do the same on the other side, matching your opposite corner with the dot from your pattern piece. And then you can start gathering the sleeve head so that it fits the top of the sleeve. Once it fits and the gathers are distributed evenly, go ahead and pin in place along the sleeve head. And then baste that in place. Fold your sleeve right sides together, matching the underarm seams, and pin in place. Sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and finish your seams. Apply interfacing to the wrong side of your sleeve facing piece, and then fold it in half so that the short ends meet, right sides together, and pin in place. Sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and press your seams open. I've also taken my sleeve facing piece back to the ironing board and folded the unnotched edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch all the way around. Now I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and edge stitch close to that raw edge all the way around. Now place the notched edge of your sleeve facing right sides together with the bottom of your sleeve, matching the seams, and pin in place. Continue pinning all the way around, matching your notches. And then sew the facing to the bottom of the sleeve with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now trim that seam allowance. And then we're going to understitch, opening the facing out away from the sleeve, and with the seam allowance pressed toward the facing, sew the seam allowance to the facing all the way around with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Turn that facing to the inside of the sleeve and give that facing seam a good press. Working from the inside folded edge of the facing, you could slip stitch the facing to the inside of the sleeve all the way around to keep it in place. I'm going to be working from the outside of the garment, stitching in the ditch in 2 places. I'm going to stitch in the ditch of that underarm seam, aligning the seam of my facing with the seam of my sleeve. I'm also going to stitch in the ditch of that bottom pleat. Here is the seam of that bottom pleat. I'm going to place my needle right in that stitching line and stitch in the ditch here as well. This way the facing will be nicely anchored on both sides, staying to the inside of the sleeve. Now we're ready to insert the sleeve into the dress. Place the sleeve in the armhole of your dress right sides together, matching the underarm seams, and pin in place. Continue pinning all the way around, matching your notches. Once that sleeve is pinned in place, take it to your sewing machine and sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to trim this armhole seam down to about 1/4 inch. And then finish that seam in your preferred method. I'm going to be using my serger. And repeat all of these steps to complete your other sleeve. Place your ruffle pieces right sides together, matching your notches, and pin in place. Open out this top pinned piece and place your remaining ruffle piece right sides together with this piece, matching your notches, and pin in place. And then match the 2 free ruffle edges and pin those in place right sides together. Sew all 3 ruffle seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then finish your seams. Now we're going to hem the bottom of the ruffle pieces. If you like, you can press up the full allowance and do a narrow hem, rolling it twice to the inside and then edge stitching close to that inner fold. I've gone ahead and serged all around the bottom of the ruffle pieces, and I'm just going to turn it up to the inside about 1/2 inch and then edge stitch close to those serged stitches all the way around. Now we're going to sew basting stitches into the top of the ruffle, leaving thread tails at the beginning and end of your stitches so that you have threads to pull for gathering. We're going to sew these basting stitches in 3 separate sections, from seam to seam, leaving thread tails, and then starting a new set of stitches on the opposite side of that seam, again leaving thread tails, and sewing again until you arrive at the next seam, ending your stitches, and then starting anew so that you have gathering stitches for each of the 3 ruffle panels. Now we can start attaching the top of the ruffle to the bottom of the dress. Take one seam of your ruffle piece and match it with the dot that you transferred on your skirt side front piece and pin in place. Do the same with your next seam, matching it with the other dot on the opposite skirt side front piece. Then place your remaining ruffle seam at your center back and pin in place. Now we can start pulling our gathering stitches so that the ruffle fits from pin to pin. Once those sections fit together and the gathers are distributed evenly, go ahead and pin in place from pin to pin. And then we can sew our ruffle in place all the way around with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then finish your seams. Now that the ruffle is finished, your dress is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other sewing tutorials for more great inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.